We are here to unveil the research report 2018 Trends and Practices from Shared Services Forum. Thank you. Sanjay and Rakesh, I would request you to stay back. And Rakesh, can I hand over this to you?
I'm good with either. Okay. Hi, very good evening, all of you. Once again, warm welcome to this evening. Thanks for taking your time out and being with us today evening. It's as Pallavi was saying, it's a midweek, and there is a lot of traffic all across for multiple reasons, typically. So actually, I realized that pretty much all of us were before the time, because we started on the time. And evening events, we struggle with starting on the time because you start late, you finish late, and everybody is watching, watching the watch kind of a thing, what time these guys are going to finish the sessions and so on and so forth. So we wanted to keep it very tight. Just to give a context to as we are starting, I think the whole intent for us is to share some insights from what Sanjay and the team was doing for last few months, and then just share more about what we did over the last few months. But that's what the whole idea, to share some insights from this report. This is a physical copy, and we agreed not to distribute physical copies, and hence we have moved to e-copies. And each one of us who is in the room will be receiving an email with an e-copy, a digital copy. And also whoever has participated as part of the interactions or the research or the survey will also receive the digital copy of this survey report. So over to Sanjay.
Thanks, Rakesh. So
we have both has to be here, so I'll be assisting to you.
You're young enough to keep standing.
I don't know.
Whenever I get tired, I'll sit down. Thanks Rakesh, and thanks everyone for joining us. First of all, I'll just spend maybe half a minute giving you a very, very brief introduction to the Shared Services Forum. The forum itself started off several years ago in the year 2011, and the concept was actually started much earlier between Ravi and Rakesh. And the intention of the forum, even at that time, and by the way, as time has evolved, the concept of the forum also has evolved a bit. The concept of the forum is really the intellectual and research part of the services field. So while there are a lot of practitioners doing a lot of great stuff in the world over in services, be it services for defined companies, for GIC organizations, which are offshoots of parent companies, or service providers on their own, internationally, even locally, etc. Everything. We found that there is a very, very a big gap in the world of information as to how these things progress, and the information is very, very unstructured. There were a few forums that did get created, that got created over a period of time, but we believe that not necessarily every one of them was centered so focusedly into the services world, and that's what we did. Over a period of time, we've released so many publications giving different views and models and various structures. The advantage is that every one of us in the forum and the entire team that we have got, several back in Noida and Delhi, are all coming in from having actively participated in the services industry directly for several years. So we can actually give a very real-time picture about how things actually work and completely closely involved with everybody. We also do these conclaves, annual conclaves. We've done 8 so far, paralleling the 2011 to 2018. And this year in 19 we do our 9th, sometime in the 3rd quarter. And we also honor some of the leading people and organizations in the field of services. And for various achievements that people have done, or the various achievements their organizations have done, some stellar leaders, many of whom have been global leaders, have been gracious enough for having graced our functions, and so we've honored several of them as well.
I think just to add, if Sanjay, if you can add to it, I think 2 things interestingly which happened about the whole shared services forum journey, because I was talking with a few of you just before the event as well. I think there were a lot of events which were happening by some event companies, and they continue to do that, and they do it at a large scale, and they do it. We were surely not from the event space. We are all practitioners. What we were missing in some of these events was the practitioners connect and exchange of information, exchange of knowledge. And knowledge is not about just success stories, also about learnings and the failures. So we wanted to have even some failures to be shared in the platform, rather than only the success stories to be shared. And that's where the whole journey started. Back to you.
Thanks, Rakesh. Absolutely right. In fact, we run a quarterly journal called Process Edge, and the journal is a collection of several initiatives that many companies have taken, stories about them, or concepts that have evolved or are being talked about, etc. So the journal is a continuous journey of experimentation and knowledge sharing and learning from each other. And when we talk to people, there are so many different things that we learn all the time. We try to put them into words and keep them into a space where we can share conveniently for the industry. Absolutely, thank you very much, Ravi. So, for the journal, the Process Edge, I can suggest anybody here who has a story to tell, or has a view, or has a different practice that you actually have experimented with and has either succeeded or failed, please feel free to come back to us. We will certainly engage with you and create a document around it, etc., and circulate it for common knowledge. And the most convenient person to connect up with is Pallavi. Both of us and of course Ravi, all of us are available at any time. Thanks for reminding Ravi.
I think one more point, I think it's maybe a repeat for a few of you who has been a very regular visitor to Shared Services Forum, but just to give you a construct is, we look at typically 4 things. Knowledge sharing events, which is obviously required. Second is a lot of frameworks, research, publications, quarterly journals, Sanjay talked about. Third, he also talked about is the leaders and the company recognition. What we realize is a lot of hard work being put by the company shared services and the leaders in this space, and they also need to be recognized for that work. So there is a separate eminent jury panel, which is not few of us here, who reviews the award applications for the companies as well as for the individuals. And there are multiple categories of the award applications. From the individual standpoint also, there are 2 kinds of categories. One is a pioneering leader, which is more a felicitation for them. They have done it and they have set the industry and set the things in motion. And there are some leaders who are in the industry and they're still doing and delivering to this industry. So there are 2 levels of the leadership, and we have been fortunate to have some major names. I think Shivin was checking about ANZ. Pankajam Sridevi, who is the head of ANZ, was one of the recipient of BPM Achiever Award, being in the industry and continue to be in the industry delivering it. Or for example, Vineet Nair or Raman Roy of the world has received the Pioneering Leaders Award, just to give you the story. The 4th thing is community. I think we're also building a strong community where people go back and connect with each other and share what's happening. In fact, I have come to know about 3 smaller events happening in Bangalore, one in Mumbai, where they have taken it to those places and they formed a small team to do it. Now what we are trying to do is we are also making that formal with those teams by saying, okay, we have local chapters across cities. So we'll have chapters in Pune, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore and Hyderabad. That's what we have thought of to start this year. That's quickly on the forum front. I think moving to the research.
Yeah, why don't you just...
Okay. So I think just to build on it, I think we always think of what is relevant for some of the organizations now. We always keep thinking about it, and that who will provide that insight. I mean, there's few of us sitting in the shared services forum team is not sufficient to have that kind of insights. So that's very critical to reach out to the right kind of people. And we said there are two ways to reach out to the people. One is to reach out through interactions. So we connected with leaders across the globe, and they're thought leaders, and they are into different industries. So manufacturing, services, different kind of verticals. So some playing operations role, some playing a CFO role, and so on and so forth, and different segments in the business services, GICs, as we call it, the global captives, or Indian CXOs, or maybe even a BPO leader sitting across in the geography. So we cut across the geography, US, UK, Europe, India. So we spoke with multiple leaders, received their insights. It was a structured conversation which we had, and received their insights. And then we also had an online survey where a lot of data was collated through a similar kind of set of people. Again, the reach was GIC teams, India captives, Indian organizations, global BPOs, and so on and so forth. That is what we are calling the primary research. Then it was supported by, obviously, a lot of good work which has been done by many other organizations globally in terms of putting things together. We surely tried to see what is relevant in this context, and we got some of the information from there, a lot of secondary stuff. And then the third area where over the years we have built a lot of our own repository benchmarks, and as we were talking about in the last 8 years, we have got about 500 participating leaders, and they have their own experiences. We have about 100 plus presentations, case studies, which has been shared by the leaders in this forum. So we used some of those as part of the research input, and came with this research report 2018. Did you want to click? Yeah. You have the remote control.
I wish I had your remote control.
So I think just taking this quickly, I think this is we'll not get into, this is a whole 900 pages document, and what we tried to do was we just got some 15 pages out of this. So there's a lot of English behind whatever is said here. Just to give a big picture from the perspective, the world is, the whole economy is swinging across the world, or India, whatever you call it, without being biased about any political party. But there's a lot of things which is changing in multiple aspects. The major point here in this graph is all about how the technology spend is shifting year by year. You can see the same month in the last year, the technology spend was 5.6%, it has become 6.7%. So the technology spend by an organization is changing because that is also supporting that whole swing in the economy. That's the way it should be seen. You can take to the next one. Again, a quick one to just share from the IT BPM industry standpoint. As Ravi was talking about, we are, and this is one of the, I don't mind taking that view to say, with a bit of vengeance, I said when I started the Shared Services Forum in 2011 was, you are having all the global needs outside the India. You're having all the global benchmarks and global polls way before 2011, all outside India, from the global leaders and so on and so forth, where about 57% of the IT services exports happens from India, the land of India. So how can you not have the polls here? How can you not have the events like this here? How can you not have the research like this here? Rather going to Singapore or London or somewhere else. Obviously that is important. With 167 billion of this industry, the interesting piece is it deploys about 4 million kind of workforce. And last year itself, it has grown by 26 billion in terms of revenue and about 100,000 employees in this industry. The interesting piece again out of this whole thing is there, if I just take the IT out and services in, the services almost counts about 35% of the overall thing. So obviously IT has a larger, the taller numbers if I can say. But if I just say IT services and services is about a large number here. The growth trajectory again, it seems to be very interesting from the perspective that there's a lot of projection that in the next couple of years, we may be getting another 40 billion kind of an addition in terms of the revenue. Very bullish about the market, with a lot of digital being added and the digital economy part of the IT industry.
Okay, so one of the things that we've done is that, as Ravi said, Shivin said also, that things have changed a lot. And so we said, all right, so things changed. Yes, of course, I've grown bolder, and that's certainly a fact. I've also sort of grown a paunch. That's all, but no one's interested. What are you interested in actually? So we thought of the 5 things that I think the industry as a whole, the servicing industry as a whole, is more keen in learning about. So we thought, let's share. From our point of view, what are the 5 big things we think are making the big difference in the services industry? So I think the first thing is that capabilities is increasing in a big time. That is, you also know NASSCOM changed the GIC term to GCC, and there is a reason why the NASSCOM organization did this. And they didn't do it because of convenience, they did it because they were forced to do it. The reason is that centers which were looked at as centers of service or output are not centers of service or output alone. They have become specialist centers. And now the word in fact is not even specialist but super specialist. And going ahead, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Capabilities have increased, and capabilities not just in the learning world, as in the world of the knowledge of the industry in which you are, but capabilities overall. Digital capability, for example, has become supreme today, and that is an important, as important an exercise as any other. In fact, now we'll soon get to know that there is no difference between digital capability and service capability. It's actually the same thing. Another very big difference that we found is that mergers and amalgamations of specialist firms. Organizations have begun to realize that there is just no time for you to learn across. Organic growth is passé. People have begun to acquire talent. People have begun to acquire capabilities on a big time basis. So just eat the organization up, hopefully not as aggressively as that, but take the learning of already prepared basis. So that's the second trend we found in a big time. And by the way, this is happening across, not just in service companies like BPO companies, but anybody who wants to improve or take capabilities. Just no time to acquire knowledge as we go along. Just buy it. Third one is companies themselves are setting up dedicated units, specialist units. And more importantly, there are organizations who are not afraid to fail. So they are setting up innovation labs on themselves. Companies are now more and more open to try newer ideas. And innovation has become a very, very big thing. We used to talk about innovation labs, etc. It's all become real now. Organizations are a lot more tolerant to failure and therefore more open to innovation and create their own centers of super specialization, super excellence. The next thing we talk about is artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence. Artificial intelligence is one part of the business, and artificial intelligence sounds very artificial. But the point here is that artificial intelligence, as it was originally thought, was not intending or does not intend to actually push people out of jobs, but to elevate people from one scale of jobs to the other jobs. And the part of intelligence, the job of the intelligence, is to support or augment anything that people or humans may be doing in the organization. So that's the shift intelligence has brought in the last few years. And then finally, one of the last, certainly not the least, is that time has shortened big time. Transition time, I remember those days, I don't even want to talk about it, but transition times used to be talked about in so many months. 2 years, 3 years, and people used to go overseas and learn the businesses and come back and do the things over here. We used to have the transition and sandboxing and all that. Where do you hear of them now? All of that story is gone. There is no such thing anymore. So the truncated transition time, now you have specialist packages, models, which create that environment where newer and newer processes that you never ever done before can be really put to speed in a very quick and a short, very, very short turnaround time. The speed to market has multiplied big time. So that's the fifth.
I think just to add to that, Sanjay, I think is also only the transition, the whole value delivery post the transition. That whole thing about today there is actually when we spoke to some of this, as part of the research interaction, we challenged one point because in multiple conversation it was coming that when you're doing a transition, disruption is given. Actually, we are challenging why it is given. 20 years back it was given, why it is given now. 20 years back there was no artificial intelligence, bots, Shivin talked about digital workers, right? So why transition means disruption. So the whole thing, some of the best in class practices is how you move from that disruption to a value delivery within the 3 to 6 months of the time period. And that is where the change or the shift which we see from a trade standpoint.
Yeah, thanks. So quickly moving on. So given these 5 major trends and some of the others, we can talk a lot more about them. We in fact compiled a list of 15. It became very difficult for us to select the top 5 we should be talking about us. We believe that there have been 4 fundamental shifts in the period from then to now. And then could be anywhere between, just a few years ago to maybe 5 years ago. So the 4 fundamental big shifts that we see are clearly one, the rise of capability. All of a sudden, how capable an organization is and in which areas has become very important. So capability, one couldn't think about, the only thing I remember, I used to be an HR guy at one time in my life. Capability used to be a trait that one would look at from a point of view of human capability and skills, capability, knowledge was a ladder that we used to talk about at one time. But that's not true anymore. Organizational capabilities has become paramount. And the excellence of delivery is important. In fact, the term now being coined about is not excellence anymore, not even centers of excellence, but centers of absolute excellence. And that has become an important term because what it means is that you are at the pinnacle of what you are about to deliver. And as I mentioned, innovation and ability to accept failure. That's a very big shift. The second big shift is the technology integration. Technology is a part of the business, that is all gone. Technology is the business, is now the new thing. Can you imagine, hundreds of times you must have heard of this, where is the Flipkarts of the world, the Amazons, the Ubers, the blah, 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 blah. You can just go on and on and on. Can you imagine any of them happening when there is no technology? Technology is the center of it all now, and this progression is likely to continue even deeper. No more is process being supported by technology, no more it is a technology-enabled process. It is a technology-integrated process, and that's what the big difference is. The third difference is continuous transformation. No, transformation is not a change. American Express people, challenge for change. Gone are those days, challenge for change, etc. This is all. Change has moved to transformation. Transformation has moved to metamorphosis. Series of transformation is now called metamorphosis. And now metamorphic. If you are not in an organization or you are not focusing on a particular thing, you get left behind very, very quickly. So the transformation phase is also over. It's metamorphosis. And finally, ground up thinking or design thinking. Thinking from zero. The ability to not take baggage and create a blue sky strategy is now the real change that is happening. People are thinking very, very differently because you are forced to. The environment is changing so fast, the demand is changing so fast. Your supply and service has to change as fast as you possibly can. So these are the changes. Based on these changes, there was a couple of things that we were wanting to talk about. And I'm not going to dwell on this slide. This is about the BPM slide we created in 2013. At that time, calling it business process management, largely because this term was highly misused, and we believe that business process management needs a little bit of clarity.
When you do a Google at that time, until today actually, in fact, you do a Google, you will find BPM means BPM workflow tools. And in fact, BPM means only workflow tools. So that was a big challenge for us. And in 2013, there was no one even supporting the whole idea behind whatever we were talking about BPM holistically. And I don't mind saying that today we have examples like Infosys BPM, changing their terminal name from Infosys BPM to Infosys BPM. It happened quite late. We coined this in 2013, Rajesh, just to let you know. So
Yeah, true. So, in fact, again, to quote NASSCOM changed its terms from BPO to BPM. And if you actually knock on their door and ask why did you just do that? Largely it is because they wanted to get out from the negative connotation of O. They wanted to get out, so there may be a lot of stories around it, but everyone who is agreeing to this fact that business process organization sounds very call center. BPO call center. BPO कहाँ काम करते हो? BPO में. तो BPO means call center ही होगा पक्का. So just to get out of that image that BPO means call center, NASSCOM changed the word to business process management. I remember a conversation that I had on this one, saying that this concept of BPM, etc. And he says BPM is nothing but the new BPO. I said no, you're completely mistaken. That's not true at all. What we believe by BPM is a more holistic approach towards all forms of consolidation, transformation, etc. Nevertheless, I'm giving you history because this was 2013. It's not 2013 now, right? It's a little behind that. And we've realized that businesses are not confined to just businesses themselves. And services are becoming even more important. So we say that business has actually evolved to the enterprise as a whole. And process cannot remain defined because it's not the process like Ravi said in the little while ago, it's the service which is important. So we therefore believed and we thought, is it right for us to actually change this model a little bit? And we did change it. And we created an enterprise service management. We believe businesses have evolved to the entire enterprise. Processes have evolved to services. And so now it is not necessarily confined to managing businesses or business processes, but managing entire enterprise services. And to that extent, we've created this new model called Centum. Again, the book has some details about Centum. When you get it, I appreciate you could just go through. We will like a lot of feedback from this team. Centum actually means 100 or a group of 100. Has the 6 bachas behind it, or the 6 divisions of it, which I will just take 1 minute for you to explain. The idea is not to monopolize this session on Centum, but just to use the forum to explain this to you for half a minute. We believe that the most important aspect of Centum is customer centricity. So that's where the C comes from. And customer centricity is not necessarily to do with the COPIS or something that we used to talk about at one time, SIPOC can be reversed into COPIS, etc. But it is to do with customers as the core of pretty much everything that you do. And what can it actually mean? Here, first thing, customers mean everyone, whoever are the users of your services. Could be employees, could be the people that who actually make part of the supply to you. So the intention is to have a customer focus. Its intention is to have consolidated strategies, and it is all kinds of delivery models are included in customer-centric operation, be it either BPO kind of services or BPM kind of services as per their terminology, or captives, whatever else that you may have. The second element we believe is enterprise process management. The management of the process itself, which is across the enterprise. So the enterprise, which is at one time we used to call them, break down the silos, etc. It's exactly this and more. It's defining a process towards one corporate common goal, and which is the corporate goal. It is end to end, and it is a culmination of the customer touch points to define a customer journey. Customer journey is as important as each touch point. In fact, customer journey. Some other time we'll explain about how a customer journey is in fact a lot more than just mere customer touch points. Third element is partnership. From a partnership point of view, no ecosystem can be remaining in isolation. The whole organization has to work in partnership with several other organizations who are a part of a larger ecosystem. So how in partnership can one organization work, or in fact the whole ecosystem can work, it has to be strategic partnership, it has to be a trusting partnership, and it has to be aligned throughout the organization, whether it is a supplier and a customer kind of a relationship or any other, and it has to have a common governance or a structured, defined governance program. I'm just rushing through this, I'm so sorry. I'm hoping that everyone is following and taking diligent notes. I see no one's doing that, but nevertheless I'm saying it.
Very distant words in this. So there'll be copies which will be coming in which ways.
Yes, true. Fourth, tech integration. Enough has been said about tech integration. What does it mean? It means integration to the operation or integration within operations. So the service that is carried out is a result of the operations of the series of processes that you do. It also means that there is a coexistence of all kinds of technologies. Sometimes we run away with the fact that only the newer technologies are important, but this is not true. In fact, it's nothing but it's farthest from the truth. The actual fact is that the best digital implementation plan is where you can get the existing technologies, the legacy technology systems to coexist with the newer ones. So the automation technologies, robotic and blockchain or whatever else the flavor of the day is, has to coexist with the ones that are already in the organization. Infrastructure has to be enabling, strong and supportive, which is another part of the technology, new wave technology. And the final thing is, it has to have customer inclusion. If your technology solution is not having your customer included into your technology solution or your technology applications or services, then you might be actually losing out on the customer. Because, for example, today, if you don't know how to operate the Uber app, you cannot use the Uber solutions. And, like my mother who's 82, she doesn't know how to use the Uber app, so she still calls the Kali Pili, but we try to teach her. Fifth one is capabilities. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time about capabilities, but capabilities are very interesting capabilities that we are also learning. The knowledge management. Lots and lots of people understand that humans are assets. Of course, physical assets are assets, but knowledge is an asset. And that knowledge asset and management of the knowledge asset is as important as management of every other asset. So that is in fact a unique part of the new capability structure that we are seeing. And finally, everything in the world is digital. So digital and changing. So the metamorphosis of this. It is continuous and it has so many different models that it comes from. You have these digital tools, you have digital systems, you have digital workers. In fact, nowadays, you have digital workers who have IDs. Digital workers have, a defined role. They get trained. I mean, that's exactly what humans also do almost. So, the digital worker is as omnipresent. The only thing it doesn't do is, fight with you. Well, that's thankful. But other than that, it pretty much does everything that any other human does, and obviously doesn't go home on Saturdays and Sundays. So that, from my point of view, pretty much covers the quantum. The big question now really is how we're going to be using this framework. And I would suggest that if there are people who would willing to partner with us to put this, though we've tried our best to try to make this as industry specific as possible, as services specific as possible. We'd like to see if we can implement some areas of Centum within organizations that are represented on this forum.
I think just a couple of quick points here to add here is you can see the whole caption here, it says breaking boundaries. Why we are saying breaking boundaries is because we were pretty much getting myopic in some of the dimensions, the way things are being managed today. And I think going back to a similar conversation we used to have 5-6 years back, when we talked about BPM and people used to say, oh no, you are trying to redefine something which is not holistic and so on. So the holistic is not needed, etc., etc. Similarly, we feel now it will still take its own time for people to absorb and sink into in terms of the model, etc. But the whole point about this model is about the holistic thing, not looking at doing one piece and saying, "Oh, I'm doing great on." If you go and talk to any event you go, any interactions you meet, the first conversation is you shake hands and say what you're doing. I'm doing some digital transformation. What it means? Oh, I'm doing some robotics. What it means? Is it part of your strategy or not? Is it holistic strategy or not? In fact, to that extent, we are actually taking a view and taking a position to say, at some point of time, you need to have an ESM CXO, so Chief Enterprise Service Management Officer, who is able to look at, people were talking about chief process officers. We are saying you should have a Chief Enterprise Service Management Officer, who should be able to look at multiple dimensions of enterprise services and not just get into a small pieces of a thing, not able to manage it. That's the whole point of this ESM.
So let's quickly get into some figures.
Yeah, I think this is something which you would have seen already many times in the past. We just have tried to put more to it by saying how it's all about GIC. We're still using the word GIC, national as a GCC, because we still feel some of just changing the name doesn't mean you become GCC. You have to evolve to become a GCC. If you're still a GIC, you have to evolve into GCC, and few may be already GCC. So we took a view not to change it to GCC from a slide point of view, because I can change it here, but you have an organization to change to GCC. So it all started way back pre-2000 with American Express and GE, and they made it large, and then the whole journey started. You can see many names, major names, the marquee names having their operations in India. Take a point. I'm sorry. I think the evolution over a period has really made India as a major hub. Again and again it has been proved for the global offshoring services. We have 1,000 plus GICs in India across multiple cities, and today the GICs contribute to 22 billion out of 167 billion of the IT and BPM sector as a revenue. So it has really become an important thing as a part of the overall scheme of the IT and BPM sector in India. The interesting piece, this is where we are a little trying to dive much more into, is out of this 1,000 plus, about 550 plus GICs are less than 200. So there's one extreme which is very large, and there's one extreme which is very small. And I'm talking about a global captives, how they are able to sustain, how they are able to mature, how they are able to infuse some of the transformations we're talking about. Or is it only getting restricted to a portion of the GICs is where we are trying to dive more to understand. We surely understand there are some parent pressures on the GICs, a smaller size, to really see how they can still compete with the outsourcing world, which has a larger economy of scale. So that's one area which has to see how to unlock the potential. Some quick data points is obviously finance and accounting continues to be one of the preferred processes as part of the GICs to start with. The good thing is that out of the HR and IT, there's a lot of people talking about supply chain and procurement. And I still remember the days when people, there are still the days where people say P2P, I'm doing P2P. And I'm taking a simple example. And what finally you are doing is only I2P, which is AP. So once calling a tower is saying, okay, I'm cutting across the processes. Today, really people have gone to that source to settle kind of a cycle, and you will find a lot of GICs, those trends very evident, and they're doing it pretty well. Not getting to the charts, there are all the kinds of processes which is in that functions, typically the breadth and depth of the functions. Some of the typical benefits in the last couple of years the GICs have reaped is looking at the overall, this is the scalability of operations to really make it big for the global organization for them. Not limiting to just one sector or one small area or one country. They have made it large. They are also able to showcase some of the value by which the operations have become more robust and scalable. One of the things as part of that second chart you can see is, which is very interesting, and we were a little hassled to see that, if I can say. The cost saves continue to be one of the focus area for the GICs. I thought they were talking about more as a business metric, they were talking about some of the very business driven metrics, while what I see is the cost save is the important metrics on the chart of the GIC heads, vis-a-vis many other things. And the customer satisfaction and the cost saves were 20 years back also the important metric and continue to be the important metric. Something GICs need to do differently here is what we see. Otherwise they will remain a cost center, they will never become a profit center. Cost savings year on year, I think again there is a lot of cost savings. The interesting piece again, we were diving into few of the cases, and not to generalize it, but few of the cases we saw, the cost saves is dependent on the currency fluctuations. And because of the currency fluctuations, I'm still able to say I'm able to reduce my cost. While from a flat baseline standpoint, they're continuing where they were, or maybe slightly lower and so on and so forth. So this is also another area which we saw from a GIC standpoint, how they look at a flat baseline with the currency being locked in and no currency fluctuations to be factored. But from that standpoint, they're at least good thing that they're saying at least 15 to 20% year-on-year savings is what they're giving back to the headquarters. That's what GIC's trends are. There's some which is going beyond 20%. Some of the initiatives, I don't know, the charts are very small, I don't know if you can read it from here. This is very small. So some of the key initiatives they are looking at is all about this whole adoption of digital adoption, and looking at how they can use this digital adoption to showcase a return on that initiative what they're doing. When we dive into some of the GIC's information, we realize that very few have matured the art of really adopting it as a larger strategy and able to reap benefits out of it, versus in a big slide saying, oh, I have a strategy called digital and some bots will be implemented, showing to the parent headquarter and parents feeling very good about some of those things. So real implementations versus the plan. And that was very much evident through one few slides, few graphs here. When we're looking at embracing digital, the question was, you have a digital strategy. What is the definition of digital? In some of the interactions, we found that there is still a gap in terms of the definition. RPA stands out very clearly as one of the tool being preferred tool for the GICs being adopted. So GICs are really going for RPA as a tool. There are a few more in the list, but they're still in the list. Maybe one or two organizations might have matured further beyond, but RPA appears to be, you can see it's almost on the top of the rank, and about 60% of the GICs claims they have progressed on something or other on the RPA. The difficulty here, what we see from the next graph was, when we were trying to correlate, is the progress of the journey, but how much? Is it a selective area or a larger organization wide, which is the GIC itself? And I'm here, when I'm saying organization, I'm still limiting the boundaries to the GIC itself, not even going back to the parent. We see their implementation was very selective in some areas. Some of the large GICs in the BFS space we see has really grown into a larger organizational implementation, but primarily many GICs are still doing it for select areas. What was interesting was, because one of the points we were trying to understand was, what is that capability you are investing into? Because in an ESM model, we are saying that what is the capability you are investing to drive that digital? And on those capability, surely there's an investment which is very evident by all the GICs around, creating incubation center, getting people trained, putting the people together for experimentation, etc. is one thing where a lot of investment is being done by the GICs. People strategy standpoint, some of the trends we see annual attrition rate again remains to be, or annualized attrition rate remains to be pretty much around what it used to be. Not much of change. It seems that the GICs have mastered the art of how to retain the team, because it's still from industry standpoint is about 10 to 20% of bucket, about 60% of respondents said they are within 10 to 20% from annualized attrition rate standpoint. Some of the retention strategy which we saw in the case of GIC is empowerment, engaged leadership, which is more about letting the leaders feel that they can drive that change, they can drive that implementation, they can drive that transformation. Those were some of the specific retention strategies. Vis-a-vis, typically which used to be earlier, more about rewards, recognition, people engagement versus more about empowerment and engaged leadership is what we could see here. Another huge difference. Some of the things like creating a long-term CSR programs, etc., has been pretty much behind in terms of the program. From the priorities for the next 12 to 18 months, GICs see obviously expanding into the new areas. If they're doing one kind of a processes, they want to get into other verticals. In fact, today afternoon I was talking to two of the GICs who are, so one of the things that you also facilitate is to meet and visit the sites of other GICs. So there's one of the GICs is holding a very large manufacturing global organization is holding about their entire global leadership team in India. We are facilitating them to another GIC in Gurgaon. They all want to expand to other verticals, from one vertical, so from finance to HR to procurement, looking at upstream, downstream, etc. That is one thing they want to surely focus in the next 12 to 18 months. And what we are correlating with is that when they are looking at, again, from a competitive perspective, because what is the competition for a GIC is a outsourced provider, self-provider, there are a lot of hybrid models, but there's always a customer having a choice to give it to a captive or give it to a third-party BPO. We see there's a lot of that is in the mind of the GICs. Surely GICs are conscious about that by saying how to remain competitive. If we don't remain competitive, the time has come. And that was very much evident in the findings, because the kind of things, the initiative they're talking about is all about showing to the headquarters that be competitive. So you want to talk about this? Some of the frameworks.
Quickly. So while Rakesh was talking about GICs, and the only reason we put this one in there is to just give you a sense of what all we've done. Centum is not just the only thing that we've done. Centum is just one of the things that we continue to keep doing, pretty much one or maybe at times two in a year. We have several models that we've used people in the industry to help us design and test them, run through some of the issues and some of the dedicated areas that they want to focus on. For instance, we've created a digital metamorphosis, a 5R model, which is a framework for digital metamorphosis. When there are so many things which are changing in the world, and how digital is creating a different organization, a different thinking. How can we create some kind of a structure to help you get there? We've also done a program called ACT or ACT, which is in fact Act Now for the Future. So we've created 7 tracks on which you can act for being future ready. And organizations have to be future ready, and future is not something that's going to happen sometime later. Future is happening already. Process maturity model is another thing that we talked about, which is actually to assess what is the status of the processes or sub-processes that are in the organization today, and if those processes are great and have matured enough to a level where we can have all the parameters required for it to become an independently standalone process in its place. Technology integration. So this one, do we have it on this slide? No, we have a partnership excellence, I'm sorry. So partnership excellence is also an area that we created a model on how business units can partner together at, as I mentioned, nurturing partnership was an important aspect that we should focus on, because we believe that partners coexisting in the same ecosystem is as important as doing your business well enough. The next one we're talking about is the technology integration and a capability model, which actually gives you a sense of how integrated your technology is. So it's a capability model of creating that level of integration of technology into your business processes. People practices framework, again, another aspect that we've worked very intensively on when we have people that we have to depend upon, and people who have different kinds of thinking and social outlook. what kind of framework that we can help give leaders to create an environment of great work practices. The 3I framework, do we have the 3I? Yes. We have the 3I framework, which is actually a framework for competitive advantage using the people, the HR. This is in fact more from an HR point of view. So how human resources as an organization can help create that competitive advantage that some of the organizations may actually miss out on. And finally, a digital execution quotient, and a program which helps you create the essence or a bedrock of executing your digital strategy. So this is just a sample of 8 that we put forward.
Just to add to this, I think it's interesting one is that there are two models which when we were looking at the capability part of it was, one is digital metamorphosis and second is digital execution quotient. They're saying, one is you are doing those digital implementation, but what kind of an execution capability you have, maturity you have to really embrace and implement this digital metamorphosis.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Taking some of the India trends from the India point of view, and there are a lot of other trends available, but just taking some quick India trends. From the India shared services standpoint, we started on pretty much in the 2002 kind of a time with organizations like Dr. Reddy, Tata Motors, HUL taking the initiative. And then over a period of time, you can see there are a lot of companies which have gone through the journey. Basically, in 2014 and 17, we see there's a cluster of implementation happening in India. A lot of organizations were going for implementations here. Then there was an interesting phase, which we again, when we were talking with some of the organizations, CXO was. So this started, looking at, should we go for a consolidation or should we start looking at a transformation itself by doing some RPA or something else? And that is where we realized that they were not able to think the entire thing holistically, and somewhere the pieces were missing. That's what one of the other findings which we had of the survey. Some of the strategic, again from India, that's an interesting one. It's a very interesting paradigm challenge. There's one side of the CXOs who are saying cost is not immaterial to me, and what is important is the whole the transparency of information, the quality of information, visibility to the processes, and that's what comes out in the trend here by saying they're saying cost is not so critical for me when I set up a shared services. What is important is the transparency of information, etc. But I'll just jump for a minute and come back. I think interestingly, taking an interesting point, I think one of the as part of the interaction we realized there's a lot of CXOs still talk about why cost is not important for me. That's a question we asked. So if the cost saving is not important for you because the cost saving is not important for you, or any other reason. The response was, they feel in India to India cost saving is not possible. There's no business case because of no arbitrage. And that was an interesting myth which we wanted to really fast. And we have given the approach how to look at that. When we looked at the kind of cost saves they got, we were surprised to hear about 60% plus respondents confirmed as part of the data that they were able to get anything beyond 15% and anything up to 25%. Some 30% organizations have received much beyond even 25%. So this whole myth about cost saves in India to India is not possible actually it's a myth. And what we again dive into the detail to understand how they got it from that market standpoint. We said they are looking for a strategic view by saying, I'm not doing a piecemeal setup, I'm doing a strategic organization by looking at the right kind of a scale. Because in India, the challenge was always a scale. If you do it only for one kind of a small function, say finance or HR, you will never get a scale. But if you do a cross-functional, you create a scale. So here in India, you have to create that scale as compared to global, because in global you have a scale. That's a different thing. And you also have an arbitrage there. So here you have to create an arbitrage. Right org design, right business model. There are various business models these days prevalent, from a typical captive to outsourcing, hybrid between captive and outsourcing. And there's an interesting model which we are finding again becoming out of the lot of interactions we are finding becoming very prevalent, as an ask is dedicated captive or a managed captive or a managed services where the captive is set up and dedicated for that organization and managed by professionals. Some of these we looked at as a parameters to drive that positive business case. Right fit, right level mix, right span of control. These are the major issues in India market to drive the business case. If you don't do this, you will not get it. Going back, one of the things which came out again from India trend is critical success factors for implementation, just taking it. Every time if a shared services journey for Indian organization is successful, either you go back to Tata Motors, you go to HUL, to name a few Dr. Reddy's, always the key was the sponsorship, the executive leadership buy-in. And whenever there is a miss in that, there's a problem. So I think that's again the trend confirms that the executive leadership buy-in and the sponsorship is most critical as part of the journey itself, not just engagement. It's a sponsorship which is required to build that. Benefits from the SSC expected. The good thing is that they're still talking about improving the service levels. They're still talking about improving some of the processing efficiencies. Where we still feel India shared services may have to go is to look at effectiveness and enhancing the customer experience, which is much beyond the efficiency. So I think there's right now still looking for some efficiencies there. The function-wise view, again, depth and breadth standpoint, I think the finance and accounting still remains to be the preferred choice. Interestingly, in India, it was not HR as a number 2 or IT as a number 3. It was a supply chain and procurement as a number 2. Because somewhere, again, we were trying to dive into to understand the CFO see that this process value chain very closely. They see procurement, supply chain and finance and accounting so connected. So supply chain and procurement is becoming the second preferred function as compared to GIC world, which was HR and IT. This is another thing which is a trend which we have seen. I think this is very important for a lot of Indian shared services is what we are calling is SSC 2.0. Obviously from GIC it has gone to whatever 5.0 or whatever. From SSC it is still 2.0 because they have set up and they are getting mature. Where they are looking a lot is on terms of efficiency. They are not looking again as the holistic SSC 2.0. That's where we are giving a framework saying you should look at these 4 pillars together if you are driving SSC 2.0. Should you look at optimization? You are finding waste, you are finding cost, you are taking out those costs through lean, etc., productivity, etc. But this is the only area typically you are focused, or you are mixing this with a capability. Because if you are trying to become effective and introducing a lot of technologies, process maturity is another thing which has to be looked at. Where the gap is happening is, which we realize with some of the interaction with Indian shared services is, we are bringing RPA before even knowing what is the process. So looking at the process maturity itself is an important one. Voice of customer survey many times, actually in the GIC space also we have put it, I think it's not in this slide pack. Again, the voice of customer survey is something which is if you go, you ask every organization is doing. Typically, only few in the GIC or actually none could I see in India as per the trend where they look at NPS, Net Promoter Score. They look at voice of customer satisfaction. They don't look at NPS, Net Promoter Score. And that is where there's an opportunity to look at the capability and maturity point of view. Expansion is very important. If you sustain and leave it there where you are, then again the scale will come down, so you keep need to expanding. Going beyond the kind of processes you're doing, moving up the value chain, take that processes, build that confidence, comfort, etc. is very important from expansion point of view. When I say India, I mean apologies, when I say India is not India company, it's India offering, India services. So they may have a regional, global presence, a lot of Indian multinationals who are having lot more to offer from India if they're able to showcase the India services better. So you can even go become regional, global in terms of their strategy. The last but not least is again important is governance and strategy. You need to look at alternative operating models. If it is not your core, you need to figure it out. It can't be run as a department. If it is running as a department, in fact we were having a conversation about a brownfield versus a greenfield site. it is going to be a little bit of difficulty for managing a shared services. It needs to run as an independent business unit. Legal entity or no legal entity, but it needs to run as a separate business unit, very clearly. And it should also have a CXO connect with the CXO goals. The challenge again is, many times we have seen with some of the CXOs saying, oh, shared services does that. And finally the shared services is reporting in the CXO. Is he owning that as a part of his own KRS and the reporting to the board is what is important. And so in interest of the time, I'm just running into next section. BPO landscape. On top video.
Okay, I'll take that for 30 seconds. Sorry? Yes, I'm going to run really. BPOs clearly very, very important part of the servicing industry, and we did a lot of research with the BPOs. In fact, one of the secondary research we found very interestingly is the Everest report that was published last year, and it still pretty much holds valid, but this is a global position. And we looked at this to say, where does the BPO industry today lie? What servicing companies are doing? We found that the interesting list is, in fact, I don't think
we need a magnifying glass for it. That's the difference. We just tried to put.
These are some of the points I have written there because I can't read this even with my glasses. But one of the things that we saw was that very, very few companies that we know of very well are there at the top. In fact, this is a listing which is actually a cross between revenue and growth, with 75% weightage being given to revenue and 25% being given to growth, equally shared between growth in absolute terms and percentage terms, etc. So Everest has created this group list of 50, and once you get to see it, you find that very, very few companies are either Indian or Indian based. Most of the companies which are domestic US are the ones which are creating, catching the top.
What we liked about the whole thing was, this concept was about, it's just not about top line growth, it's also about your profitability growth. And you're very profitable, but you're not growing. You're very rapidly growing, but you're not profitable. Both are very much a factor of some of the companies here.
So very quickly to the next one, just for us to have a better readability, we've actually sorted this down, and Everest done is that too for us, but we like this slide a lot better. We found ADP from a revenue point of view absolutely the topmost in the world, and thereafter so many other, etc. Accenture, Teleperformance, and Xerox and Paycheck, and so on and so forth. These are the top BPO companies by revenue. On the right hand side are the top BPO companies by growth, only by growth. So you can actually see Capgemini? Cognizant. Cognizant is the top company for from a growth point of view, which is actually very, very telling. And it's a very interesting slide, so we just sort of put it up for your information. However, the data follows.
Yeah, we can just take one or two.
Okay. So a few trends that we noticed in the BPO world also. One of the things that we noticed is those large deals that we used to have, 40, 50, 50, $80 million kind of deals, they seem to be shrinking big time. Now organizations don't come through to BPO companies saying we want 1,000, 2,000 FTEs, and etc. All those things are actually out. Organizations try to split their offerings to various service providers. Another thing we've noticed that GICs are actually creating value by spinning off their units to BPOs, and BPOs have now begun to take on GIC work by rebadging, for instance, and that's becoming an important trend that we are getting to see.
In fact, this is one thing which I want to add is, I think I've been talking with at least 5 or 6 large BPO CXOs, and they're as part of their top strategy is to look at hunt for GICs, hunt for shared services to take over, and they're looking for how to unlock the value of the client organizations by looking at some upfront monetization, at the same point of time giving a service contract which is lucrative over a 7 to 10 years kind of a period.
Yeah. Another trend is that obviously everyone would have realized this even in GIC to a certain extent, rule-based processing, I mean, you used to say transaction processing and with that, and even rule-based processing is now passing. Everyone is going into more complex processes. In fact, now it's called contextual, so context-driven operations, and so the criticality level and complexity level is increasing. As we saw in the previous slide, onshore is becoming very important. And now there are these digital deployments, etc., where costs of onshore services are actually coming down. So one of the competitions that the BPO industry may actually face could really be stateside, or for that matter any country that we are talking about. Their own onshore businesses seem to be growing quite rapidly. However, in all fairness, some of the traditional service providing locations are still the largest by far. So, you have India, China, Brazil, Philippines, and Malaysia. The 5 largest service providers in the world continue to remain the heads in the services. However, rapidly upcoming is Eastern Europe, to a certain extent Turkey, Eastern Europe, North Latin America, the Mexico, kind of locations. Those locations are also coming up in a very big way. From a demand point of view, US and UK by far the maximum. There's enough and more demand coming from US, UK. We see a little bit of demand coming from Europe. There are very, very strict laws in Europe. It becomes very difficult to deal with European companies. However, cost is escalating, so the demand is mounting. So there is an opportunity in the continental Europe as well. And finally, as unexpectedly, FTE pricing still continues to dominate.
This is very interesting.
We were thinking FTE, 20 years ago we used to talk FTE. Now who talks about FTE? Everything is about value based and outcome based. Okay, no sir. FTE pricing still continues to dominate the pricing model. So unfortunate, because we like to talk big, but the ground reality still is majority of it is FTE.
So I think this is an interesting one. I think we're looking at a few things where we said, there is a lot on the left-hand side written in terms of, you want to communicate by saying, digital, RPA, whatever, blah, 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 all the stuff. And on the right-hand side, you are still following some of the traditional stuff, FTE pricing, traditional locations, same sales model, etc., etc. So this is true, which still seems to be an opportunity to somewhere map as part of the offering. So I'll just jump into the interest of time. We're already slightly overboard on the time. Not getting into anything else, but any questions we can take, and Sanjay can take the questions.
Yeah, really? So, yes.
We'll wait for 30 seconds, no questions means we are very happy to.
Everyone's waiting for the bar to open, I guess. But seriously, anything that you think that...
There are a lot of charts here, honestly, as we go ahead. I think we are not able to show many here, but there are a lot of charts here which can give you the details about some specific elements you might be looking at. The only thing which we realize is that sometimes one specific chart is not sufficient to understand the trend. You have to look at with some 2-3 other charts to understand the trends because they are correlated. At one place, there's one kind of a trend, but if you look at 2-3 together, then you see the exact the opportunity. So that's one thing which we will leave to all of you to look at.
Yes,
please. I think it would be good to introduce yourself maybe to the larger.
All right. I can do that. So Madhavi Dahanukar. I was, just thinking about all the stuff you've covered. I think it's really, really comprehensive. One area maybe that you probably have some data on but not enough to publish is the regulatory aspect, especially with what's happening in India. So if you think of the regulatory landscape and for startups, for example, angel, tax that's being talked about, or just the regulatory aspect of getting work into India. You can't do, for example, sales because you get taxed on the revenue that you generate from India being. How does that all weigh in to how CXOs are thinking more strategically about bringing work into India? I think that's an important aspect maybe that you want to...
And you're talking about Indian regulation rather than most like that.
I'm talking about Indian regulation in particular, especially for the ITS industry.
Yeah. So Trump is out of this conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'll try.
That's important too.
I'll try to respond, Sanjay, please. So you're right. I think there's a lot of simple regulations, like even the GST has become an interesting altogether from a global landscape standpoint. Today GST is not only in India, it's talked in India. In fact, it was spoken all across the globe, in all across the multinational organizations, because they were aware something is going to change from a service point of view in India. So that's where the India regulations are surely impacting. Couple of things which is making, supporting, I'd say there's enabling thing also which is happening. There are a lot of policy restrictions, etc., etc., etc. But enabling thing is happening is there are a lot of sponsorship which is Indian regulations is supporting to get, even for example, continental Europe, we have seen somewhere, there's a lot of support which is being given by Indian regulation standpoint. From an economy specifically, some of the economy related regulations, there are again ways to interpret, and depending upon what is the headquarter of your organization, that has its own implication. There are ways to manage it, not bypass it, manage it, which is very, I'll say, supportive to some of the things which you're talking about. So there are surely some data which we can obviously collate and share. From a CXO point of view, if I look at from a CXO, and here I'm saying global CXO's point of view, Madhvi, they are very upbeat about India as a market. In fact, today only I was talking with these two companies. They all are visiting India, thinking India is still not just about arbitrage. Why so? Because 75%, and we are talking about big, 75% of digital talent is sitting in India. 75% of the across the globe is in India. So there are a lot of is in India.
Yeah, but not necessarily in India.
Supported by India, export from India.
Right. Okay.
So from that standpoint, there is a lot of sponsorship from the CXOs to still consider India as a market. Though regulations has to be communicated accordingly to some of these headquarters to manage how they should look at it. And I think, so your question CXO, I don't know if I was able to respond to something. And you want to add anything to it?
No. So maybe at least I have mentally got the question maybe slightly skewed. You're therefore saying that there is a restriction in Indian statute somewhere, or some regulation here that stops businesses to come into India?
No. What I'm saying is that there are a fair amount of regulations in India that make it difficult for companies to move a large part of their work. So for example, you can't do telesales in India, because if you generate any revenue from telesales, the foreign company is then taxed.
Right. So you're talking about, okay, now I understand. Thank you very much. Yeah. So you're talking about the tax and permanent establishment regulation. That is true. The restriction of permanent establishment, the risk of being established as a permanent establishment is very, very serious, and it's very real. So the deal conclusion cannot be termed as having been registered in India. So you're absolutely right. That continues even to date. And that, by the way, is not necessarily just telesales, as you very rightly put. It is in so many. It's like in many areas, like insurance arbitration, for example, Series 6. So many kinds of different. Yeah, absolutely right. That still continues to be a little problem. Now I understand your question. Thank you very much. We don't really have a solution as a country. And by the way, and I must say, there's nothing wrong in it. The provisions of law for permanent establishment were set up for a particular reason. The risk continues to remain in the country today. The boundaries of the country opening up big time, and different people setting up offices over here to carry out businesses, with evasion of tax as one of the objectives, which certainly the government of India will not allow. So,
The other interesting observation I had, I read a NASSCOM report recently that says GIC total number of people employed is 900,000, so less than a million. And you just called out 22 billion out of 167 as the revenue. Yeah? And I was just thinking that if you think about 22 billion as a percentage of 167,
correct.
about 15%, less than 15%.
Right.
If you think about
The number of
less than
people
a million
yes, correct.
against 4 million, which is the total workforce, is 25%.
Very disproportionate.
That's very disproportionate. I was kind of trying to
Interesting
make
point.
sense of those numbers.
Yeah, very good, interesting observation. Absolutely.
We were just talking about that only, Ravi. Very disproportionate is right.
But that's a factor.
You have a question. Yeah, do you need a mic?
Somebody can mic.
You can. You just want to give the mic to Ravi, please?
Till recently, NASCOM was not tracking the total, revenues and costs, and even today, it's not that clear to NASCOM. For the right reason, because GICs don't declare that easily. Okay, they did because they have certain tax purposes to declare. So I think it's a number which is kind of understated. I do believe it must be much higher in terms of what it should be.
Yeah. It's also how revenue is defined, Ravi.
Absolutely. Here, there's a bit of a difference. Absolutely.
I'm Nilamon from Infosys. So right now in BPM, the third-party service providers and the captives coexist, and we get more and more captives also we hear. So as part of you, and you talked about some captives thinking what next after being there for 5 years. So as part of your research, what is your general take? Do captives still feel that from a cost standpoint they are competitive compared to third-party service providers?
Let me just try to take that into you're right, absolutely. I mean, there is a two minds to it. One mind is the captives wants to remain competitive, so they are trying to do whatever could be competitive. But at a point of time, they have understood that it is required to have something called not make versus buy, versus make and buy. Right? So the choice is, you take a call as a captive, or the parent will take a call. That's where the difference which we see as again in the trend in this industry. The GIC heads here are able to take that kind of a view, and you will see more and more in the last 4 years, there are a lot of outsourcing contracts managed by the GICs here, not by the parent directly. Because they are taking that view of make and buy, by saying what kind of processes they would like to carve out and get the service provider to work on that, and they continue to go up the value chain and showcase to the parent that whole ecosystem together as the benefit and the value delivery. So that is where the GIC heads are leaning towards, but they are still trying to be competitive because they are required to be competitive. But to a specific question, they are not just going by the make versus buy, they are looking at make and buy decisions very clearly. And that's why you'll find a lot of center heads are really working towards spinning off. Not just a parent task. The center heads are working towards how to unlock the potential. In fact, another trend which actually we have not written here as part of the book is we have seen at least 10 situations, 10 scenarios in the last 2 to 3 years, without naming the name of the clients, I can tell you, where they are insourcing work from the BPO organizations. They are pulling the processes back and putting back into the captive. This is all because of that competitive advantage. They are finding that somewhere they are not getting that value for the cost, and that is why they are pulling it back. So the cost is not only the driver, that's also a value to the cost, which they are finding it's a broken process. And it's a perception. It is all looking at from a BPO point of view, as BPOs are typically doing a chain of the processes. They are not understanding the end-to-end of the processes. They are very far from the customer. That is one of the perception. And 10 large deals, details which we have, which has been insourced from an outside provider. And across the BPO, it's not about a specific one or two BPO. Across the BPOs, we have seen that situation. Yeah, I can see it.
Hi, my name is Saket Drona. Quick question related to what the gentleman just asked. And I actually see an opportunity there when you mentioned earlier in the presentation that the GICs are looking at further, if I may, outsource work to third-party BPOs. And back in the day, the mighty Jekis became Genpact, and frankly, all hell broke loose then when from a 10,000 FT company they became 20,000 overnight. So I'm just trying to understand if there is a genuine opportunity for people or for players who are trying to enter, well, the not so niche market, but trying to also, let me rephrase, how easy is it to get business from a captive into a third-party environment, and what really is the arbitrage for the captive?
So, sorry, Saket, if I understood your question, you were saying if there's already a captive,
Right.
and captive wants to unlock it by giving it to a provider,
Sure.
how it is easy for the captive to get an arbitrage or a value by outsourcing further to a BPO provider.
And why would they? Because see, like Madhavi mentioned, the pricing are all cost plus and arm's length pricing. So why would they pay more on a per FT basis to a third party?
But that's the whole thing. They are not supposed to pay more. They are supposed to get better value. And if there's a value, that's where the whole model is changing, where they are looking at by saying what they can invest and where they should not invest. And they should get a partner to invest. So the whole enterprise services management model we are also talking about, another thing we're talking about nurturing the partnership. We're saying you have to align your partners in the entire ecosystem where they should be able to take what they can contribute best, and you need to know as a captive what you can invest best. And if you look at the entire thing together, then it becomes a strategy. If you look at only piecemeal, it is not going to work. And that is where you find sometimes they are outsourcing and bringing it back. Because they are not looking at the entire thing together.
The captives are also then probably taking the BOT route and then bringing it back. Is that a fair statement?
Some.
Not much. BOT is, some.
That isn't like very common. The more common thing is, more and more people are realizing professionally how, whether you want to be deep or wide. I mean, it's a traditional question, deep, wide. So now it's becoming very, very important. That's the point. You can be as wide as you want and say, I'll be professional all over, but that's not necessarily fact. There's this limited bandwidth that you have for leadership. Leadership says, let me focus on things that are core. The things that can help somebody else, the processes which are already matured, for instance, can actually be handed over to someone else. And so they are saying that if I can get a defined value for the processes that someone else can do for me, so that at least I don't have that headache and I can focus on the more important thing. I mean, this isn't a new story at all. I'm not telling you something that you didn't know at all. You've known this for 20 years or whatever number of years you've been in service with. This traditional both learning has become very real now.
Yeah, if I can add to it, I think is the whole concept of this whole, typically in like in an automobile world, it works like component business. That's the way it has become now. And that's the way it has to work now. Because all the, you can't manufacture everything. Shop made versus bought out is what the strategy now. You need to know what you will produce yourself and what components you will get from the others. Today, many, luxury cars are just putting their labels. Everything is a component which is a compilation. So I think that's where the difference is, and I see there's a lot of trend on that, Saket, where captives, GIC heads, and if they are not doing that, they are being then tasked by the parents to figure out what next.
To answer your question, whether there is an opportunity, I think that's an important question. There is a phenomenal opportunity actually, I believe. And the only thing about an opportunity is you can't just go after the opportunity and say there's an opportunity, should I step into it? You will have to first create that capability within your organization to be able to stand up to it. You're not going to get anything just because there is availability over there. There is enough availability. Create that niche, create that capabilities and be able to provide answers which are different and much better than what they were doing themselves. Only then will you be able to, even...
In fact, there are some of the points we're talking in the report is something called platform-led services, IP-driven services, etc., which are very, important as you go ahead and develop the whole strategy.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, please. Can we have a mic here, please? No, but still, I think it's better to...
I think you're loud already.
Thank you. So 3 trends, at least that I've been seeing over the last few years. One is that the digital maturity of captives is relatively lower than third parties. Third parties have invested and they've become far more digitally savvy, and their ability to transform processes is much higher. Therefore, a lot of captives are actually saying where digital can be deployed quickly and I can get quick value, I'm going to start looking at those processes to be outsourced as part of my strategy, and therefore leverage the third-party outsourcing organization. So that's one trend, at least, that I've been watching. The second trend that I'm seeing is because the costs back in-house are so high, they're saying let's get stuff into the captive first, reduce as much cost as I can, and then get more value by moving it to the outsourced. Right? So I'm not directly giving it to the outsourcer and letting the outsourcer make 40, 50, whatever % margin. Let me first reduce the cost myself before. So that's the second trend. I think the third trend, which I've been seeing more recently, is a lot of the organizations are putting out RFPs where they are inviting outsourcers and their GICs to bid. And that creates an inherent competitiveness within your system to say to the GIC, look, you're not as competitive. So unless you get there, why should I be spending more money on you? And that's putting a lot of pressure on the GICs. Again, I don't know if you've seen that as part of your research.
No, it is, absolutely. It's a combination of all the three which you talked about. It's a combination of all the three. Yeah, and certainly you don't want to be in that situation number 3. See, if you're a GIC and you suddenly find that my headquarters has gone and talked to some BPO and you say, now I'm being asked to compete for the same job commercially, then it just can't be working. There's obviously something wrong in your shop here. And that's a situation where you've already lost it. So that is the situation which GIC heads can today actually avoid. And like we said, it's very, very easy to avoid. I mean, if you get into a comfort zone and sit and say, haan, theek chal raha hai, then you're lost it. It has to be a fact that you have to be really, really uncomfortable in the situation in which you are and continue to keep, Hindi में at least बोलते हैं कुरेदना होता है. I don't know if many of you will relate to that, but that's what I relate to. That if you do not continue to keep scratching on the surface all the time, even when you are comfortable, this is what is going to happen. Your boss back in the US is going to, or wherever the country, the headquarters are, they're going to turn around and say, I want to outsource, and you just don't want them to outsource. You need to outsource.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point. Yeah, it's time. Maybe last question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Siddharth and I work with Automation Anywhere. I just wanted to understand what do you think, what is the accepting rate of RPA in the world of GIC? Because when you talk about almost some 900,000 people employed with GICs, so there are too many hidden parameters in it, because companies, when they are hiring people, they are also showing the government that we have taken up the people of your local region. So there is a certain amount of tax saving also which they get. And over here, I won't use the word cutting the FTEs, but maybe we are deploying them somewhere, or it's a fancy way of saying that we are deploying them somewhere, but finally we are cutting down onto the FTEs. So I have been handling all the west side, the GCCs. The way I see it, it's still more of an educational, it comes from an educational front that they want to know what RPA is. Now, and when we talk about word digitalization, I still feel it's very subjective in nature. And the more and more we drill down into it, I don't know how much of, that's why I'm asking, what do you think out of your experience, the accepting rate for the RPA in the GIC?
So maybe two parts to your question. I think digital and digitalization, I'll leave Sanjay to talk with you offline. And
Offline is better.
Yeah, offline is better, because we
Offline
spend
is
a lot of
better.
time on this to define some of these by saying what really it means. Because sometimes, when you used to do a Google search BPM, used to say workflows. And today also we have a BPMS. Even we in 2013, BPMS is systems, and systems could be multiple. You can have BPM multiple systems. Duplicate audit tool, reconciliation tool, whatnot. Why only saying workflow is a BPM, kind of a BPMS, right? Similarly, digital is not equal to only RPA, and multiple stuff. The question, you're having a very valid observation. And that is where one of the trends says that at least about 60%, 59% of the organization GICs are saying, or respondents have said, they have embraced RPA as the preferred tool towards digital. They have at least embraced that. The implementation is very select areas. So what has happened is maybe one specific individual would have been progressive and he would have thought of somewhere and he brought it, or because in a global map they have to go to talk to their parent and say, how are we evolving and how are we becoming better? So we are becoming better because we are embracing digital and hence RPA. They are still not aware of how it fits into the overall strategy of the GIC, and that's where the challenge is. if they are use the point educated, I think you need to be obviously oriented towards the benefit of this, and it should become part of a holistic strategy. So there is at least 59% of the GIC respondents are believing that they have touched RPA. Only 15-20% believes that they have got a benefit out of it in a larger organization, while others are just doing in a POC, small sectors. At least I know about at least 4 GIC heads I spoke with, and agnostic of the platform, it may be automation anywhere or anything. I've seen at least umpteen of POCs being done across the process areas, but they have not moved from a POC to scaling up to a larger organization, and they are a global captives, right? Who understand GIC well. And when you see their presentation, which is meant for the headquarters, it talks about we are taking the roadmap of digital, and RPA we have started implementing. That is there for the last 3 years. Right. So to your point, that's the situation. I think it's a time. Sorry, Rahul. Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a quick point on the RPA thing that you're talking about. I'm Rahul from ACCA. Just talking about the RPA point that you were touching upon, and you substantiate on what Rakesh is saying. So there's a very interesting study that we did in collaboration with Chartered Accountancy Body of Australia, New Zealand, and KPMG, and we've circulated some for you to read. It talks about some of the statistics are very interesting about how some of the very large organizations, dollar organizations, have gone ahead and implemented RPA successfully. They've gone through the transition. I saw ANZ as one of the success cases. But there's a lot of education, or there's a lot of ambiguity about RPA. There are organizations who are doing POCs, like Rakesh mentioned, but they're still at a POC level because no one knows what to expect. They've not either done the processes or identified the right kind of processes to automate, or they're still at a stage where there's a lot of ambiguity around what RPA is, how would it help, what will it lead to. So as a part of the research, what we were also able to find was that there's a lot of resistance from employees within, there is a lot of change management that needs to undergo, and that is something which is creating a lot of hindrance. So do read that report, that will probably help answer your question.
And just take me 30 seconds on that. I think that's the reason we talked about digital metamorphosis versus digital execution quotient. Because execution capability is where a lot of GICs has to invest and uplift that readiness for embracing that implementation, because they're just getting into the journey without getting that infrastructure of that capability. That is where the challenge is. Thank you all of you. Thank you for your patience listening. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll just take a quick couple of minutes to wrap the evening. I think this is the time to just say thank you to a few of people who has worked on it. The entire research team led by Sanjay. Thank you, Sanjay. You kept me awake till 3 in the morning for the last couple of days. Thank you for that. So we're really working through the early mornings. Because we can deliberate to the death. I think the research is always complete thanks to 2 kinds of people. One is respondents, so thanks to all the respondents, all the people who participated in the research interactions. Obviously the team which worked on it, the last team which worked on it, including Pallavi, including Shilpa from my team, including people who are not here from my team here, Karan, Shilpa, Rahul, if I can remember few names correctly. I think there are people who Rashna really worked really hard on this to really put it together. Second, I think I just also want to thank the industry to believe in this, the whole concept of this whole research. We took a lot of time to come with it and supporting us to go through it. That was very, very nice, and thank you to all of you to make yourself available to be part of this evening to really hear us. So thank you all of you for being here with us today evening. Please feel free to reach out to us for any questions, Any information, any insight, we'll be very happy to share that. We'll be very happy to partner because it's not, as I was sharing in the beginning, it's not that it's all is our insight, it's a culmination of multiple insights. So I'm sure we'll have something more to add to it and would like to incorporate that as part of the journey as well. So thank you all of you for your time in the evening, and we look forward to catching some time outside this room. Thank you. Have a great evening.